So today I'd like to do a breakdown of the album Quadrophenia by The Who. I was doing a lot of thinking this week. I was working with a lot of young people, and I was noticing, a lot of teen angst, which I find really interesting because the difference between angst, which angst is anxiety, but angst is more of that you have a hope and that you're really trying to do better in life. So you have this hope that you're going to do better. But there's a lot of despair. You look at the way that the country, the world is working these days. It's difficult to make money. It's difficult for social connections. So I'm noticing a lot of that. And I also, to be totally honest, I notice it myself too. So I thought, let me talk about something that was a big deal to me. I bought the Quadrophenia album with my own money when I was 14 years old. And I don't want to say it saved my life, but there's a lot of therapy in there. And there's everything that a teenager would want to talk about that's bothering. Rejection, you have abandonment, you have feeling isolated, you have disillusionment, you have trying to fit in with society, trying to fit in with your friends, trying to fit in with girls, certain teams. And I don't want to get into the details because I'll do that on another show. But it's very close to my heart. I probably listened to the Quadrophenia album, oh God, I don't even know how many times. I wore out the first copy. Then of course I got it on cassette and CD and every which way you can do it. I saw the movie. The reason why I want to break this down a little bit today is because I think it's a story that everybody can identify with. And so I'm not going to totally break down the whole album, it's too long. But one of the things I really want to just discuss today is the liner notes on the inside. Because although it's an album, two records, 4 sides of music, there's a massive amount of liner notes that gives you a story that Peter Townsend of The Who wrote from the perspective of a teenager trying to make it in the world. And obviously there's a lot of him thrown in there. And just the story alone is enough to make people think. Now, I got this album 40 years ago. So here's the cover. And this is a copy that's actually never been played before. So I don't want to open it too many times, but you can laugh at me at this. The reason why I had to print out the liner notes is because when I was 14 years old, I can actually read that. I can't read that anymore. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to put the album here and I will be reading the liner notes. But before I start, I just want to give a little background. The term quadrophenia is a made-up term. It's based off of a psychological term of schizophrenia. Now, I don't know if it's a mistake that Peter Townsend made, or he wanted to connect it to the average person. Because when you have split personalities, it's called dissociative identity disorder. But I don't think that sells, and probably doesn't look good on a record. So he called it schizophrenia. But schizophrenia would be a split personality in terms of how Peter Townsend would say it. What Peter Townsend was relating to of having 4 distinct personalities growing up. And he broke it down to where each guy in the band, because there's 4 guys in the band, each one would represent each personality. So the term quad means 4. So you have quadrophenia. So it's a made-up psychological term. And back then, if you bought the album, you could listen to it on a quadraphonic sound system. So each side would come out in the 4 separate parts. So real quick, let's go over the 4 personality types. He calls it, number 1, the tough guy. So you get the teenager who thinks he's all big and bad and he wants to fight everybody. The second one would be the romantic side, the one who wants to score with girls. The third one would be more of the lunatic, crazy side. And the 4th personality would be the beggar and the hypocrite. To break that down just a little bit more, just to show you how a rock musician is actually thinking, if we take the trauma responses, which the most known would be fight or flight, but let's add in fawning. So if we have those three, fight, flight, and fawn, what we have is the tough guy, the fighter. So that's a trauma response of fighting. The romantic is someone who's wanting to connect with people and really trying to get those social connections. So it's not fight or flight. What it is you're kind of fawning. You're trying to work in tandem with somebody else. Now the lunatic side is the part where a lot of young people, and unfortunately older people, experiment with drugs to try to self-medicate. And that would be the lunatic side. Now the lunatic side of leaving reality is running away. So that part of the trauma response would be flight. Number 4 is probably the most interesting because Peter Townsend calls himself this. He's the one who plays the part of the beggar and the hypocrite, which is part of the fawn response. It's usually when you grow up in an environment that does not have a lot of safety or stability. So you may have a parent who is very angry all the time, a person who is an alcoholic or some type of drugs. So what you're doing is you're not being your true self because you're trying to manage the other person's emotions. So what happens is you become more codependent. You become passive aggressive. You become not authentic because you don't want to make somebody angry, right? So you're trying to work with them. So the term beggar would be that you're always trying to beg for somebody's approval. You're trying to beg for them to like you. You're trying to beg for them to be a decent person and not hurt you. And in that sense, you're being inauthentic, so you're being a hypocrite. What you're saying and doing is not exactly who you are, because if you are who you are, there can be repercussions. You can get hurt. So overall, this is a story that comes down to a person's fight for and their search for self-worth, importance, finding meaning in their world, and especially if the world is pretty cruel to them, or maybe even worse, an apathetic world. So with that, one more thing I have to tell you. This is written by Peter Townsend's British, so there's a lot of British slang. So just real quick, the word row means fight, the word bird means girls, and the word leapers is amphetamines, and there's a couple of other ones in here that are a little bit weird, but you'll understand. So let me go through this, and I hope it helps some people. I had to go to the psychiatrist every week, every Monday. He never really knew what was wrong with me. He said I wasn't mad or anything. He said that there's no such thing as madness. I told him he should try standing in a queue at a Brentford football game on Saturday morning. I thought it might change his mind. But my dad put it another way. He said that I changed, like the weather. One minute, I'd be a tear away. Next minute, all soppy and swoony over some bird. Schizophrenia, he called it. Nutty, my mother called it. It used to be all right at home. My dad would get pissed out of his brain every single night. And when the television finished, he'd storm out of the house like a lunatic to get to the eel and pie shop before it closed. He'd come home with enough for an army. I never liked the eels, just the pies and mash, and the liquor. My friend Dave said that eels live on sewage. My dad must be full of it. He used to eat 5 bleeding cartons of eels a day. I don't think he ever twigged I was doing 5 cartons of leapers every day, each to his own sewage. The rows at home started when I got back from the trouble at Brighton. I'd slept on the beach and my suit was ruined. I really cared about my suit, all of my clothes, even though my mother said I didn't care about anything. My mother's terrible when she's had a few Guinnesses. Not that she'll ever settle for a few. As soon as I said I was leaving, she started rejoicing like the war had just ended. I was a mountain of paranoia. Coming down off of leapers isn't much fun. You can put it off by having more just as you start feeling bad, but it only makes it worse in the end. Pills used to make me see things. They used to make me feel great, like Tarzan. But I think I saw life the way it was. People couldn't hide from me when I was leaping. My shrink used to have a sign on his wall to make me laugh. It's said that a paranoiac is a person who has some idea of what is really going on in the world. And that was me on Leapers. I pissed off after I'd slept off the come down. I got my suit cleaned at the automat and spent 2 hours pressing the pissing thing. It never did look quite right. I took my parka as well, in case I had to sleep rough. I got a shitty couple of nights sleep under the Hammersmith flyover. There only seems to be about 5 minutes in the night when there ain't some flash bastard in a sports car going round and round with his tires screaming and a police car bell coming up from behind. On the second night, I saw the posters going up outside the Odeon for a Who concert. I'd seen them down at Brighton. They were a mod group. Well, mods liked them. They weren't exactly mods, but mods did like them. They had a drummer who used to play with his arms waving about in the air like a lunatic. The singer was a tough-looking bloke with really good clothes. If I hadn't seen him near home, I would have said his hair was gold. Real gold, I mean, like gold paint. The guitar player was a skinny geezer with a big nose who twirled his arm around like a windmill. He wrote some good songs about mods, but he didn't quite look like one. The bass player was a laugh. He never did anything, nothing. He used to smile sometimes, but the smile would only last half a second and then it would switch off again. My friend Dave said he smiled a lot more at his sister. They were engaged, I think. His bass sounded like a bleeding VC-10. They played Tamla stuff and R&B. They could have been perfect if they played Blue Beat as well. I used to know one of them before they got their record in the charts. So I went to see them, and they were all right. They smashed up so much gear that nobody believed it was real. When they played down the marquee, they used real gear. I have a bit of bass drum to prove it. After the show, I hung around outside waiting for them to come out. When they did, they never bloody well recognized me. I shouted, and one of them turned around and said, "How are you doing?" Like he remembered me. "Working," he said. I hate when people say that. Of course I wasn't working. I was still at fucking school. Next day I got a job as a dustman. Now I know why people say working to one another. 9 quid for full week's filthy work. They stuffed it. I left after 2 days with 2 quid in my pocket. 2 of the blokes there were talking about striking for more money. But most of the geezers there had been working for the council for years. They looked upon it as some sort of church, the mayor as the pope. One bloke has medals for being a war hero, and he didn't even have the guts to strike for more pay. They were all clean though, after hours. There's a part of me that hates people. Not the actual people, but how useless they are and how stupid. They sit and stew while the whole world gets worse and worse. Wars and battles, people dying of starvation. Old people dying because their kids have got their own kids. And they say they don't have the time. That's what makes me smash things up. My shrink says I ain't mad. He should see me when I'm pissed. I don't know what clicked inside me, but I got fed up with sleeping under the flyover. The weather was terrible for a start. 2 rainy nights, and that was it. I really started to fancy going back to Brighton. I still had about 200 leapers left. He kept me company. What was really weird was seeing this bird that I really liked. I even had her on the beach at Brighton. 2 in a sleeping bag is really cozy. Until you're finished. Anyway, she was with my mate Dave. Him. She walked right past me after a dance at the Gold Hawk. The girl of my best friend and all that. It did me in. It was like the last straw. The real last straw was yet to come. I was so brought down, I smashed up my GS scooter in the rain. I can't bear to think about it. I walked to the station down the railway tracks across the river. I felt like throwing myself in front of a train, but I didn't. I took about 20 leapers at once, got a first-class ticket to Brighton, and set off to my land of dreams. I did some thinking on the train. At one point, I could swear I was floating about in the carriage, looking down at these two city gents. What was weirdest about it was that I could see myself as well. Must have been the pills again. Brighton is a fantastic place. The sea is so gorgeous, you just want to jump into it and sink. When I was there last time, there were about 2,000 mods driving up and down the promenade on scooters. My scooter's seen the last of Brighton Bloody Promenade now. I know that. I felt really anonymous then, sort of like I was in an army. But everyone was a mod. Wherever you looked, there were mods. Some of them were so well dressed, it was sickening. Levi's had only come into fashion about a month before, and some people had jeans on that they looked like they'd been wearing them forever. There was this bloke there that seemed to be the ace face. He was dancing one night in the aquarium ballroom, and everyone was copying him. He kept doing different dances, but everyone would copy it, and the whole place would be dancing a dance that he had only just made up. And that's power for you. He was really heavy too, though. When the mods collected in Brighton, the rockers would turn up too. There were never as many of them, but this geezer once took on 2 of them at once and beat them. That didn't usually happen, I can tell you. I was in a crowd of kids once, chasing 3 rockers down Brighton Pier. As it seemed they were going to get caught anyway, they stopped and turned to meet their fate. All 100 of these kids I was with stopped dead. I was the first to stop, but the rest ran, so I had to follow. There's nothing uglier than a rocker. This ace-faced geezer wouldn't have run. He smashed the glass doors of this hotel, too. He was terrific. He had a sawed-off shotgun under his jacket, and he'd be kicking at plate glass, and he still looked like he was Fred Astaire reborn. Quite funny. I met him earlier today. He ended up working at the same hotel, but he wasn't the manager. I never ever felt like I blasphemed, in an old-fashioned sense. But I was in a pretty blasphemous mood when I left for Brighton. Brighton cheered me up, but then it let me down. My folks had let me down. Rock music had let me down. Women had let me down. Work wasn't worth the effort. School isn't even worth mentioning. But I never thought that I'd feel let down by being a mod. I pinched this boat, first time I'd ever been on a boat at sea. I had another few leapers to keep from coming down, and I felt a bit bravado. So I headed for this rock out off the coast. It was sticking up, very jagged, but very peaceful. I didn't know what I was up to, but I know now. Schizophrenia? What a laugh. It must be all right to be plain, ordinarily mad. About halfway over, I took a swallow of this Gilby's gin I bought. Booze never did help me much, though. On the boat, it did me right in, especially on top of the pills and the come down. Anyway, the sound of the engine turned into this drone. Then the drone turned into a sound like pianos or something, like heavenly choirs or orchestras tuning up. It was really an incredible sound, like the sort of noise you'd expect to hear in heaven, if there is such a place. I pinched myself, and I really wasn't drunk anymore. I was floating. I felt really happy. I must have looked bloody stupid, as it happens. I was waving me Gilbys around in the air and singing in tune with the engine. The sound got better and better. I was nearly delirious when I got to the rock. I switched off the engine and jumped onto it. When the engine stopped, so did the music. And when that beautiful music stopped, I remembered the come down I had. I felt sick from the booze, the sea was splashing all over the place, and there was thunder in the distance. I remembered why I had come to this bastard rock. So that's why I'm here. The bleeding boat drifted off, and I'm stuck here in the pissing rain with my life flashing before me. Only, it ain't flashing, it's crawling. slowly. Now it's just the bare bones of what I am. A tough guy, a helpless dancer, a romantic, is it me for a moment? A bloody lunatic, I'll even carry your bags. A beggar, a hypocrite. Love reign over me. Schizophrenic, I'm a bleeding quadrophenic. No one in this story is meant to represent anyone either living or dead, particularly not the mother or father. Our moms and dads are all very nice and live in bungalows that we bought for them. The end. And as a real quick thing, as you notice, as he's on this rock and he's contemplating his life. And one of the things that ends it is this song called Love Reign Over Me. And the term reign is not rain as in water, it's in ruling over. Let love rule over you. And what he decides in the movie and as you go through the album is that life is not going to get any easier, and you cannot expect life to get any easier. But what makes the change? It's how you face the difficulties in life. And so you learn to manage your life, and you learn to let love reign over your life and try to do the best you can and be with the best people you can. And instead of trying to fit in with people where you don't fit in with yourself first and love yourself first, and then build your own family or tribe. And that's really that part of the end of it. But I also like at the end where obviously you're talking about a very traumatic soul who wrote this. And at the end, of course, he doesn't want to blame his parents. So he's like, yeah, our moms and dads are very nice, don't worry about it. And we bought them houses when we got rich. And so even then, as a lot of people are traumatized, they still want to make it work with their parents. And what I want to say about that is that that's very normal too. And that's okay. And you need to be able to manage that in your own way. It's if you were traumatized in your family of origin, there's nothing wrong with still wanting to make that connection. Anyway, I hope you liked that. That was part of a breakdown of the album Quadrophenia by The Who. Thank you for listening.